Welcome to Salute Your Sports Week 51. Almost an year since we've been doing this show, reuniting the college gang from the sports radio show about 7 to 8 years later. I'm Kamenenchev. No Drew Brackett. He's busy today, but Tom Castleman is here with me. We'll have a dream week of NFL showdowns to talk about. Betting locks of the week. I know Drew's not here, but he was 5-0 this past week. So if you want some NFL advice, listen to Drew Brackett. A big show today, Tom. So much more to look forward to.
Absolutely. We're going to be touching on college football. Seems like we're learning a little bit more about the sort of nebulous teams at the top. Of course, been a little while since we touched on baseball, and with the playoffs right around the corner, we would be remiss if we did not at least go there. But the place that we're going to start is the perhaps most talked about sports topic in all of punditry right now. Perhaps if you think about it as far as hype goes, the biggest regular season game of all time. We've got Belichick and the Patriots hosting Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is a story that's kind of been 2 years in the building. Ever since Brady left and went to Tampa, we knew that the AFC or the NFC South and the AFC East were due to play each other sooner or later, and now it's going to be in Foxborough. Of course, NFL schedule makers know exactly what they are doing. There's no way this game was going to be down in Tampa. So I think it's probably the most hyped, biggest regular season game of all time from the storyline perspective, not necessarily between, two really great teams. For example,
Sure.
The undefeated Bears against the Miami Dolphins back in '85. Obviously, that was big because within the season, storylines, this might be it.
Yeah, I probably agree with that. And at first I was like, are you crazy? But I'm thinking about it. And the more I think about it, the more you're right. And you know what's another fun storyline? And I'll get into this a little bit later when we talk about what type of reaction we expect. And maybe we should just talk about that now before we get into the game. But here's another fun storyline for you. Tom Brady is about to break the all-time passing yards record in New England against the Patriots. I need 68 pass yards to break Drew Brees' passing yards record. Drew Brees retired now, so Brady and Brees can't pass each other up one week and another for touchdowns and yards. It's really interesting to see what type of reaction Brady's going to get. Are they going to do something mid-game to recognize him? Because I think before the game, I think it's safe to say he's going to get a lot of cheers. But what's going to happen? Are they going to stop the game in the first quarter or second quarter saying Tom Brady has now set the passing yards record? And how much does that sting for the Patriots? Because you always thought that he was going to break that record ever since, the last 3 or 4 years. He said that he's going to keep playing. It was inevitable that he was going to break this record. And you always thought it would be in Foxborough. And that's what's going to happen. But it's going to happen against the Patriots.
It's ironies of ironies, and so long as Matt Nagy is not the guest play caller for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Tom Brady ought to break that record coming up in the game on Sunday. I think you're absolutely right. It's going to be, standing ovation. It's going to be cheers. I would say there's, going to be a rather lengthy video montage prior to the game as well, where, as much as it stings to have, Tom Brady winning a Super Bowl in a different city with a different franchise, there is no denying the impact that he has had on New England as a franchise, on Boston as a city, and just, adding to Titletown in a time where, the Celtics a little bit down, the Bruins up and down, the Red Sox, seems year to year they're either going to win the World Series or completely flame out. He brought consistency in a league that is the most inconsistent, simply because with the salary cap era, it's very difficult to have a dynasty and to build a strong championship contending team year in and year out. And while he wasn't the architect or the strategist behind it, he was easily the most centrifugal figure on the field for this franchise. And so there should be nothing short of standing ovation. What do you want to make the over-under on? Should we make a locks of the week on how long the standing ovation goes? A couple minutes? I mean, this New England Patriots franchise was like a Super Bowl appearance in '85 where they got smoked. They had a decent quarterback in Drew Bledsoe. Tom Brady lifted them into the pantheon of greatness. We went from decades ago, it's the Packers, it's the Cowboys, it's the 49ers, it's the Steelers. Now the Patriots are the bar as far as the greatest franchises of greatest franchises with this era. So New England owes a lot to him, both as an organization and as a fan base.
Yeah, the big question mark for me, and I'll hop in and answer my own question, and then, well, I'll hear what you think about it. But the big question is, who is more important to New England's success? Is it Tom Brady or is it Bill Belichick? Because, as you mentioned, the Patriots, they were also in the Super Bowl, I think, in the 90s. They had some solid seasons, but they hadn't won a Super Bowl crown before Brady got there. But they also hadn't won a Super Bowl crown before Belichick got there. So it's interesting to see who you think the most important of those two is to their success. I think this is a very difficult question to answer. I think there's a few things you need to look at. As far as if you're going to make the argument for Bill Belichick, you'd make the argument that Bill Belichick was the general manager. He is the one that drafted Tom Brady. Don't forget that Belichick is the coach of the Patriots, but he's also their general manager. He's the one that put together those defenses. I know he's the head coach, but he's sort of like the head coach / defensive coordinator. I know a lot of teams have the head coach / offensive coordinator. The Bears, not in a good way, but some other teams in a good way. He's sort of the de facto DC and head coach and GM. And I think early on in those Super Bowls, the first Super Bowl, as an example, Brady had 145 pass yards in the Super Bowl, and they still won the game because of their defense. You take a look at Brady's first 3 Super Bowls. He played well, especially the next 2, but the defense was the main reason they were winning those Super Bowls. But you look at the last 3, I'd argue that Brady really stepped up, and the NFL changed. The Patriots adapted. They got themselves some more weapons, and they focused on offense. So it's one of those where, like, I say the first 3, Belichick is more important. The last 3, Brady's more important, but I think they're equally important to me because they were sort of like a perfect marriage that ended up getting their divorce and reports are that, like, this is how Belichick is. He treats all the players the same way, and it works for him. But Tom Brady, I think, had felt that he'd earned, and he probably had earned it, the right to be treated a little differently. So ultimately, that didn't work out. But I think you have to also give Belichick some credit because Brady, in that first season, a lot of people wanted Drew Bledsoe to come back in and be the starter after he came back from injury. Drew Bledsoe is a very good quarterback in the National Football League, above average, one of the better quarterbacks we've had. I'm not going to say he's one of the greatest ever, but he's certainly an above average quarterback in the NFL and had done a lot for the Patriots organization. So Belichick stuck with Brady. And ironically, I don't know if you remember this game, but in the AFC title game against the Steelers, he put Bledsoe in for a drive, and Bledsoe delivered when Brady was struggling. And then some people were like, well, maybe Bledsoe should start the Super Bowl. And then Brady wasn't playing well in the Super Bowl. They were like, well, maybe Bledsoe should go win the game. And he stuck with him. Brady didn't have a great Super Bowl, but he was clutch at the end of the game. So a lot of credit has to be to Belichick for identifying Brady. But at the same time, there's no way that he would have thought that he would be this good. Because I just read an article, 10 quarterbacks he's drafted since Brady. It's not like he hits on all of his quarterback picks. He really doesn't. I think he saw that Brady was underrated, but he would have taken him in the 4th round if he was so convinced of Brady, because he wouldn't wait around until the 6th round. So Brady obviously lifted his teammates' success. Obviously, he set all sorts of records in the playoffs for Patriots and quarterbacks in general. So he's very, very important to their success. For me, it's sort of a dead heat. I think they both get a lot of credit. I do think, obviously, New England has struggled a lot more since he left, and Brady has went on to success afterwards. But I wouldn't put too much stock in that because you look at Brady's last season there, they were 8-0, and then they finished 4-4 down the stretch, lost the playoff game. I think Brady saw the writing on the wall. He saw that Edelman was past his prime. Gronk was past his prime, about to leave. He knew that he wasn't going to get targets there. Obviously, with Brady, they're better than with Cam Newton or Mac Jones. I think they're a playoff team with Brady, but not a Super Bowl contender if Brady had stuck around there. So he saw the right situation in Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay had put up a ton of yards the previous season, had a lot of great targets. Jameis just didn't deliver in the clutch, and he turned the ball over. The NFL is a game of inches. 8-8 and 12-4. 4 close games is the difference. And that's what the difference was between Brady and Winston. So I give a lot of credit to both. I struggled just picking one. I think they're both very important in the Patriots' success.
Absolutely. And I really like the way that you kind of like delineated the timeline in terms of the success, where it kind of starts with Belichick and the overall culture and philosophy that he instills, building a support system around his quarterback. And then as time goes on, Tom Brady then becomes the support system for the rest of the team as they kind of have a drop off in talent. And that's just a function of, as I mentioned earlier, with the salary cap, quarterbacks' pay goes up. You have less money available for all those other positions. And I think a slightly underrated part of Tom Brady's impact in New England was, I think it was definitely for one contract, but maybe a second contract extension where he actually structured it so he was getting less money to allow for the rest of the roster to be built out around him, because he's looking at it like he's got all these different endorsement deals. He's made all this money on his contracts. He cares more about winning and getting paid a respectable amount, but he doesn't need to be going out and breaking the proverbial bank. In terms of, who's the most important, it really is indecipherable, because football's the ultimate team game, not just between players on the field, but between coaching staffs and the players on the field, and putting teams in positions for success, in employing strategies and game plans for those players to be in a position of success. This isn't like basketball where you can just give the ball to LeBron James or Michael Jordan or Larry Bird and trust that your best player can just carry you to victory. I don't care how good the quarterback is. If somebody misses a block here or there, if somebody runs the wrong route, everything is thrown into chaos. So it's probably a cop-out answer to say they're equally important in incredibly different ways. But that's that's the way that has to go. I might give a slight edge to Tom Brady just because the player on the field is going to be more responsible for success. His knowledge of the game and at the line of scrimmage, being able to read a defense and make a play on the fly, or to call a different play to make an audible on the fly, probably a slight edge to Tom Brady. But yeah, it's pretty hard to separate the two. Bill Belichick will get his laurels and his flowers when he's done with coaching. Tom Brady's getting them now because he's coming back to town. But Bill's going to have his day as well.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point. If I had to absolutely pick a tiebreaker, I could maybe go with Brady because of the players. But then again, I might not even have a tiebreaker just because Belichick, I think, gets credit for being the GM also. A lot of teams, the coach is not the GM or director of player personnel. It's pretty rare that Belichick has that. He's sort of like a soccer manager. In soccer, a lot of times they allow the head coach to pick what players he wants. Although soccer, they're not as strict with the salary caps and the transfer fees. You have more of the ability for a super team. But Belichick kind of has total control in New England. And that's very interesting. And I think it's interesting to see, because I don't know if you remember a few years ago, like Belichick wanted to let Brady go, and Robert Kraft actually stepped in and said, no, Brady's not going. And then Brady did end up leaving. And I think Belichick wishes he still had Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that would have been interesting for New England. But I think both of those guys have been great. And I think Belichick is going to regroup. I think the Patriots just need a little bit of time to get a few more offensive players, a little bit of time to develop Mac Jones. They're not going to be a playoff team this year. I know we were a little bit high on them during our preseason previews, but they haven't looked great so far. Their offense is a major issue. As far as this game in itself, I mean, it's interesting because we know that Belichick knows Brady and Brady knows Belichick. I don't know who has the advantage here. I mean, I think the Bucs are almost for sure going to win. But the line is 6.5. I mean, who do we think covers that line? Is this going to be a close game, or is this going to be a Buccaneers rout?
I mean, I'm leaning towards saying it's going to be a Buccaneers rout. Unfortunately, I was really high on the Patriots coming out, but the one thing that I kind of underestimated is that rookie quarterbacks are going to struggle. They're not going to come in and have success right away. And, looking back in time, Tom Brady didn't have great success right away. Look at some of the other all-time greats. Even Peyton Manning had a really, really rough start to his career. So I think that with the rise in, offense and scheme and play calling, it's like, okay, maybe quarterbacks and also with college football being closer aligned to NFL, or perhaps the other way around when we think about some of the spread concepts, maybe, we thought Mac Jones, or at least I thought Mac Jones was going to be a little bit better, a little bit more consistent. That comes with time. So I think that, Tampa Bay, even with some injuries, has just about every single advantage on the field for this game. So I feel pretty confident they're going to win by a decent to significant margin. I don't anticipate this game being particularly close. If so, that is almost purely because of defensive scheme on Bill Belichick's part, where he somehow makes it this like weird, grindy out kind of sort of game. And actually, Tom Brady seems to play kind of okay in those, where like he'll be, average at best for like 3.5, 3 2/3 quarters, and then just like at the end be like, oh yeah, I'm called the greatest quarterback of all time for a reason, and come out and have success. But I'm leaning more toward Tampa having a fairly easy time in New England.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you on that. Just because you look at the Buccaneers right now, they're scoring 34.1 points per game. That's tied for the most in the NFL. The Patriots, 18 points a game, 26th in the NFL. The Bucs defense actually has not been great this season. They've underachieved. I think they look at this as an opportunity to show up and be the defense that people expected them to be. And I think that Tampa Bay has way too many offensive talented players, way too much talent around Brady. I think even with some of the injuries, I think Scotty Miller is going to be out. I'm not sure what's going to happen with Antonio Brown, but you still have Mike Evans, you still have Chris Godwin, you still have Gronk, you still have Leonard Fournette. Like, they've got so many great offensive players. I mean, probably like their third or fourth skill player is still better than the number one option on New England. And obviously, Tom Brady is better than Mac Jones. As far as rookie quarterbacks, something to think about. First off, I kind of felt this whole class as a whole was a little bit overrated, just because having so many guys get drafted so early. I didn't think any one of these players were per se like all-time great players. I think Lawrence is the one that had the potential, but I thought he was a little bit overhyped. But a lot of times, as far as rookie quarterbacks, like who succeeds right away, a lot of it has to do with what situation you enter. You look at Patrick Mahomes. I know technically he didn't play his rookie year until the last game of the season, but his first full season as the starter, he dominated because he was in a great situation. Aaron Rodgers, what did he do? He dominated because he was in a great situation, taking over Brett Favre and a great organization in Green Bay. So I don't think any of these rookie quarterbacks are entering particularly good situations. And I think that is probably the reason behind their struggles. I think Trey Lance is the only one, but he's the one not playing. And when he has played, he's been pretty good. But I think Brady and the Bucs are too good. I feel comfortable in them covering that 6.5 point spread. The only way that they don't cover it is where there's sort of a backdoor cover. Maybe New England is down 14 or down 10. They get a touchdown, or field goal or something with like 30 seconds left in the game. Doesn't really impact the result. I do think that the Buccaneers are going to win. And I think Tom Brady sort of wants to stick it in Bill Belichick's face. I think he's been very careful publicly, but if you see some members of his team, what they've said, I think he's not too happy with Belichick. And I think he looks at this as an opportunity to sort of pour it on. Keep in mind, the Bucs are coming off a loss. They just lost to the Rams. So this is sort of like a statement. This is Sunday Night Football. As you mentioned, all eyeballs are going to be on this game. I don't think Tom Brady is going to be, taking it easy whatsoever. And he's actually an early season MVP candidate, given how well he's played. So I think he looks at this as a chance to put up some stats. I will say this, the Patriots secondary, I believe, is second best in the NFL in pass yards. For sure, one of the best. Yeah, second best in the NFL in pass defense, I believe. So in theory, they have the personnel to not let the Bucs score 35-40. But even if the Bucs score 27-30, Like, I don't think the Patriots are getting the 20 points in this game. I mean, they haven't
Right.
averaged 20 this whole season, and now they go up against a good Bucks defense. So I feel pretty comfortable with the Bucks cruising on NFL primetime. But that's kind of the one NFL game we're talking about that's sort of the obvious pick. But we have a lot of really interesting games, a lot of really close matchups. And I think none so is more exciting, I guess, like, as you mentioned, like on the field type thing, where
Hmm.
we're looking at both teams have a chance to win. I think the 3-0 Rams hosting the 3-0 Cardinals, one of the most exciting games. I think there's 6 teams left undefeated in the NFL right now. So few, and they're going to drop like flies because some of them are playing each other in the coming weeks. Who do you like in this Rams Cardinals game? Because I know you are very high on the Rams, and the Rams
Hmm.
are sort of like number one in the power rankings. If you look at, like, real quick before we get into the game, do you think the Rams are the best team in football now? And I'm guessing you're going to pick the Rams to beat the Cardinals in this game.
Yes to both of those. Yeah, I was high on the Rams coming out of the preseason, basically because we've seen what Sean McVay can do conceptually with scheming, and Jared Goff, who was, I think, a little bit maligned. I think that he was or is a decent quarterback, but that's not what you expect out of a number one overall pick. That's not what you expect out of a multi-million dollar contract extension quarterback. Well, Sean McVay now has that guy in Matthew Stafford, somebody who, on the one hand, I'm not going to be upset if the Detroit Lions are losing, but I kind of felt that for a lot of seasons, Matthew Stafford was the lone bright spot on an otherwise meh kind of team. So
Once
it's
Calvin
kind of,
Johnson left, yeah.
for sure, yeah. Well, even with Calvin Johnson, it's like you got Matthew Stafford, Calvin Johnson, and then what else? There's just so much lacking in that franchise. So it's nice to see him on a team where now he doesn't have, the big star wide receiver, but he has a pretty decent core around him. He's got a decent offense or offensive line running game backing him up. He's got a pretty good defense with some really talented and exciting players on it. I absolutely think that the LA Rams are the best team in the NFL right now. I think that the thing is like they haven't even really hit their stride in full. I think they played a really complete game against Tampa, but I'm excited to see what they can do against teams that aren't Tampa's level because they're just going to be so much better. I think I'm not going to come out and say they're going to be a 20-0 team winning the Super Bowl and everything like that. They're going to
But you
have their
have
share
them
of.
winning the Super Bowl. That was
I
your
do
pick,
have
I
them
think.
winning the Super Bowl. Yeah, I don't have them going undefeated. What year was that? 2008 or 9 with the Patriots where they were 18-0 heading into the Super Bowl. I don't think that's going to be the case with this LA Rams team.
Not in that division, no.
But no, not in that division, and not quite frankly in this league. I mean, with now that they've added an extra game, you're going to have an off day. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have this and that. But I think as far as talent goes and coaching, that blend we were talking about with the Patriots dynasty, I think for at least this season, the LA Rams have that just right mix. So I have them winning this game over an exciting, but I think still kind of sort of incomplete Cardinals team, a Cardinals team that only put up, what was it, like 23 points on the Jacksonville Jaguars. They had to rely on a kickoff return or a missed field goal return, I believe it was, for a touchdown to really put some distance. So I think the Cardinals are exciting, but not quite on the same level.
Yeah, by the way, I think Kyler Murray is the number one fantasy quarterback. He's on your fantasy team going up against your team.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another note, I know it's very early in the season, but Cooper Kupp, I think, is leading the NFL in receiving yards and I think maybe touchdowns. He's like
It's
one,
been
two,
fantastic.
and right up there for both. So I don't think Cooper Kupp's going to play this good the whole season, but Cooper Kupp has looked like a legitimate, like, elite wide receiver right now. So, yeah, I think on paper, early on in the season, the Cardinals have played an easier schedule. They've beaten the Jaguars, they've beaten the Vikings. Certainly the Tennessee win was huge for them, but I think Tennessee had an off game. I think week 1 of the season is really, it's really hard to really sort of predict who's going to do what. And I think the Cardinals had a game plan for Derrick Henry and it showed. But look at statistically, they have nearly the same plus minus on the season. The Cards are first in points. Rams are third. Rams 10th in scoring defense. Cardinals 11th. So this is on paper pretty evenly matched. And I do think the line is about 5 points. So I actually would not be surprised if the Cardinals cover that line. That almost
Mhm.
seems a little big. But as far as the game, I'm taking the Rams. And I think you're talking about the Rams hitting their stride. I think on offense, they're playing as good as they can. But on defense is where they haven't hit their stride. Like I said, they're 10th, 11th in scoring defense. This team was first in scoring defense last season. They've got Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, a guy, a D lineman, and a corner who's, they're probably the two best in the league in their positions. I think Donald certainly is. Ramsey, if not one, he's top three for sure, I think. So I think the Rams have the better defense in this series. I think the Cardinals have played great defense early in the season. Lost in Kyler Murray's success so far has been the improvement of their defense. But again, they've done it against the Jaguars. Titans and Vikings better on offense, but they didn't play as great against the Vikings on D. So I think for me, the difference in this matchup is that the Rams have a better defense. And by the way, I know it's different seasons. I know the Cardinals seem to have taken a step forward, but they've lost 8 straight against the Rams. And Kyler Murray has not gotten going against that defense so far in his career. So give me the Rams in this game, but I think it's going to be a fun game. I think it's going to be a close game. And I think if the Cardinals win, it would certainly be exciting. I just don't see it. But another game that I think is sort of like almost a must-win. I mean, it is a must-win game for Seattle, but staying in that division, do we like the 49ers, who are 2-1, literally a Packers missed field goal away from being 3-0? Or do we like the Seahawks, who are 1-2 and kind of had a surprising loss against the Vikings this last week? Drew Brackett, Mr. Nostradamus, certainly was all over the Vikings winning that game. But this is sort of a must-win for Seattle. I mean, who do we like in this game? San Fran versus Seattle. I'm going to have this game in my locks of the week, by the way.
Yeah, this is going to be a really, really tough one. And it really is a must win for Seattle because when you look at the rest of their schedule coming up, they're in San Fran, then they're hosting the Rams, then they're in Pittsburgh, then they're home against the Saints. That's a tough 4-game stretch coming up before they're facing the Jaguars. And then they're going to Green Bay to face the Packers. So if they want to have any hope of staying within playoff contention, they're going to have to win this game. And in order to do that, they're going to have to play 2 halves. I mean, we saw them score early in the second quarter, have a 17-7 lead over Minnesota, and then proceed to do kind of sort of nothing for the rest of the game. That's not going to fly. It's never going to fly in the NFL, and certainly not when you're a team that doesn't have the margin of error of being super talented, where you can maybe play one really, really good half and kind of coast the other. Seattle doesn't have a good enough team to do that. They have to keep their foot on the pedal for the entirety of the game. They had basically they ran into a great Derrick Henry game, or perhaps it's more accurate to say Derrick Henry ran into them in their overtime loss to Tennessee. And then, just a dud against a Minnesota team that kind of sort of isn't that great. So it's a must win.
Without Dalvin Cook, too.
Without Dalvin Cook as well. Exactly. It's a must win. I'm inclined to think that Seattle can get there. We saw, how many injuries? I lost, fingers on this one, losing count of how many guys went out in the San Francisco 49ers Packers game this past weekend. I thought they played pretty well against a good skill players in Green Bay, but not necessarily a great overall team. So I'm inclined to say that Pete Carroll's going to have the Seattle Seahawks up and ready for this one. It's going to be a tight one, though. It's really, really going to be close.
I think it's definitely going to be close, but I'm going to go the other way with you. I know the 49ers had some injuries, but I think they still have a lot of their key players there. Jimmy G's there. Deebo Samuel's there. George Kittle, I think, is questionable. We'll see if he plays in that game. But I think that Seattle's defense is atrocious. And they're even like a crazier example than the Bears. The Bears defense has faded in recent seasons. The Seahawks defense has completely faded. And I'm a stats guy. I love to look at the stats. Seattle is last in the NFL in yards allowed. Last in the entire National Football League. I think the fact that they haven't given up more points than they have is sort of a miracle if you think about it. I don't know if they have like really good third down defense or Other teams have been unlucky, but I think Seattle's defense is really, really bad. I think San Francisco has a much stronger defense. They've got a better overall team. I think that Seattle has Russell Wilson. They've got DK Metcalf, and they've got Tyler Lockett, the other receiver. So they've got three really good skilled players. Chris Carson, respectable at running back, but their defense is really bad. Their offensive line is really bad. You talk about sports being a team game. They don't have the team around Russell Wilson. I think San Francisco has a really, really solid team. I think they're at home in this game. And I think they also know how many injuries they have. They also know that the Cardinals and Rams are 3-0. They also know that the Panthers are 3-0. They know that they got to win these games. Home field, you got to serve court on your home field. I think Seattle, I don't trust them on the road. We saw what happened against Minnesota. I do like San Francisco in this game just because I really don't like Seattle's defense. I think San Francisco has a more well-rounded team, but that is going to be a close game for sure. It's going to be a good game. And I think the loser of this game probably not going to make the playoffs. And for sure, if it's Seattle, they're not going to make the playoffs. So it's sort of one of those must-win games for both teams. But give me the 49ers in this game.
Absolutely. A couple other quick ones to run through really quickly. We have the Ravens and then the Broncos. Broncos 3-0, but haven't really beat anybody of substance. The Ravens are 2-1. They beat the Kansas City Chiefs and then needed a 66-yard field goal to beat the Detroit Lions.
Unbelievable.
What do you make out of this game, Common? Are the Broncos for real in terms of being a solid team? Is Baltimore just a little bit lucky? Like, how do we go on this one?
Yeah, so first off, I just want to take the time to recognize Justin Tucker. 66-yard field goal to win the game. They were down, 1 or 2 points?
2 points, yeah.
Down 2 points. Field goal wins by 1. If he misses that kick, they lose the game to the Lions, which is embarrassing in itself. And probably for Baltimore, that kick might be the difference of whether they make or don't make the playoffs. I think certainly if he misses that kick, Baltimore is going to have a hard time making the playoffs. I think they're about 50-50 right now. They're far from a lock, but certainly that kick keeps them in playoff contention. The fact that he set the NFL record for the longest kick of all time in a pressure situation as the game ends was unbelievable. And if you watch the kick, I know it was just barely long enough, doinking off the upright and in, but it was like almost right down the middle. Like the accuracy was perfect. I do think there was a call that they maybe missed, a delay of game call. Maybe it should have been a 71-yard kick, but nonetheless, it is what it is. As far as the Broncos, are they for real? This is the game that's going to tell us if they're for real. I know they beat the Giants, Jaguars by 14, and then they won by 26 against the Jets, I think it was. Those are the teams that they've played, the 3 worst teams in the NFL, I think. So it's hard to say, is Denver for real? This game could go either way. I know I'm not a Ravens fan, but I'm tempted to pick the Ravens. But then again, I did see our own Drew Brackett guru in his locks of the week is picking the Broncos. So that makes me question that. But I am going to pick Baltimore. I have very little confidence in this game. I think Denver was either a 1-point favorite or 1-point underdog. It's pretty much a pick 'em game. I'll pick Baltimore just because they're a very fast team with Lamar Jackson being a very fast player, and obviously Hollywood Brown, and they've got some fast running backs and some defensive players that have speed. So I think the Broncos just haven't seen a team like this. I think it's going to be a little bit harder for them to adjust. Whereas the Ravens have played, apart from the Lions aren't good, but the Raiders and Chiefs are very good teams, very athletic teams. I think the Ravens are a little bit more seasoned against tough competition. So I'll pick the Ravens to win in a close game, maybe another Justin Tucker game-winning field goal. But Denver winning would not surprise me. And this is a game where we're really going to find out is Denver for real. And if they beat Baltimore and they're 4-0, I think they're going to make the playoffs, even with how tough that division is.
Absolutely. I'm a big Vic Fangio fan. I really also like, the uniform matchup. I think that Baltimore and Denver both have great uniform setups going on.
Sure, Denver,
But I'm
absolutely.
I'm going to be going with Baltimore on this one as well. A lot of people are going to look at that game and see, the last minute, last second field goal, Justin Tucker, 66 yards. That's what it took to beat the Detroit Lions. Let's not forget that Marquise Hollywood Brown had, I think it was like 2 or 3 dropped touchdown passes in the game, where that changes everything. That changes all of the narratives, all the history, everything. I think that you could point at 66 yards as an anomalous outcome. I can point to 3 drop touchdown passes being anomalous as well. I think that the Ravens going to get that a little bit tightened up. Definitely, he's going to be on blast in the film sessions this week. So I think the Ravens are going to come out and win this game. But I agree with you; it's going to be a very close game, a very good game. I hope that that's in the I'm in the viewing area for that game because CBS, Fox, they kind of have the different rights for different areas.
Sure.
Fingers crossed I can get that one because I think that's going to be a little bit of a lower scoring, grinded out kind of game
Ugh.
where a single possession is all that it takes. Just one big play is what it takes to separate a win from a loss. And it's just going to be really great to see as far as the viewing front goes. Do we want to touch on any of the other ones really quick? We've got
Yeah, let's
Cowboys,
go over them.
Panthers,
I think there's
Chargers,
some good
Raiders.
games.
Yeah, for sure. So, really quickly, Cowboys, Panthers, no Christian McCaffrey for the next couple of weeks. Had a hamstring pull in Thursday Night Football against the Houston Texans. The Cowboys looking really outstanding on offense, perhaps the most exciting offensive output in the NFL going right now. Who do you like in this NFC matchup that definitely is going to have some playoff implications?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty cool game. And I think we're talking about the Broncos. Who have they beaten? Well, the Panthers haven't beaten that many good teams either. I know the Saints win looks really nice, but the Saints are very up and down. I just don't trust the Saints. So for me, this is going to be a huge game for the Panthers. I do like Dallas. Dallas is 2-1, barely losing against the Bucks, and their offense is great. It shows you when Dak Prescott is healthy how good they can be. And
Hmm.
Dak Prescott, the last time he played a full season, he didn't have CD Lamb there. CD Lamb is just another great receiver. They've got a 1-2 duo now, him and Amari Cooper. And not only is Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield, Tony Pollard has played really good in the backfield. So now they have 2 running backs. They've got a new tight end as well, who's pretty good. And another key for Dallas is their defense. Trevon Diggs, Stephon Diggs' brother, has 3 interceptions the first 3 weeks of the season, a pick 6 on Monday Night Football. It was an former Alabama quarterback throwing to an Alabama receiver in Devontae Smith, and Diggs, the Alabama corner, getting the pick 6. You think Alabama's got a lot of guys in the NFL? That was really fun. So I think this is going to be a great game. I think Carolina has a great defense, but I don't think without McCaffrey, if McCaffrey's there, I think that game's one of the hardest games to pick. But because McCaffrey's not there, I don't think Sam Darnold and company have enough offense to keep up with Dallas. I think their defense is going to, be respectable. They're not going to give up 41 like the Eagles did, but I think they don't have enough to keep up with the Cowboys offense. So give me the boys moving to 3-1. I think Dallas, as bad as the NFC East is, I think we finally have a legit team out of that division.
Yeah, it's about time. And as much as we kind of decry this whole notion of Dallas being America's team, quote unquote, doesn't it kind of feel like things are a little bit more exciting in the NFL when Dallas is really good?
Sure.
I think that they're going to win this one as well. And it's a shame that it comes down to something like an injury to a team's best player because the Panthers' defense is playing really well. Their passing game was working on multiple levels, and Christian McCaffrey has a role in that. I think somebody that doesn't get nearly enough shine, especially when you consider, where he came from, is head coach Matt Rule and his transition from a college coach to a professional coach. And we see it kind of sort of not really working out too well in Jacksonville with Urban Meyer. We've seen guys like Nick Saban, Bobby Petrino flame out. We've seen other success stories. Pete Carroll is a success story, definitely. Um, but quietly, Matt Rule has put together a really, really good team from a coaching perspective in Carolina. I think Cowboys win as well, but I agree. I would have loved to have seen this game with Christian McCaffrey in it as well.
Let me ask you this: as far as Matt Rule, like obviously a successful college coach, but he doesn't have the name and the pedigree of an Urban Meyer or Nick Saban. I guess Pete Carroll did have the pedigree, so he's a
Sure.
little bit different example. But I think Pete Carroll had also coached in the NFL prior to going to college, so he had a little
He
bit
was
more,
back and forth a bit, yeah.
right, a little bit more experience. I think maybe the fact that Matt Rule wasn't a big name coach helps him a little bit. I think he doesn't go in with maybe as much of an ego as a Nick Saban or an Urban Meyer would, because they certainly can't yell at the players the same way they do at Alabama, Ohio State, etc. So I think that's interesting. But he's doing
Mhm.
very well. And another guy who's doing very well, and I'm blanking on his name. I didn't have him prepared, but the Chargers' new head coach has done quite great. You can look up his name to get that for me.
Staley, right?
Yeah, that sounds right, Staley. And he won the game against the Chiefs. He went for it on fourth down instead of kicking a field goal. He was aggressive, went for the win. They got the touchdown late, and they hang on to beat the Chiefs, which is another story in itself. The fact that the Chiefs are 1-2, they've had a lot of turnovers, some bad luck. Their defense isn't playing well. This Chargers Raiders game on Monday Night Football is really interesting because that division is crazy. You've got the Broncos who are 3-0, the Raiders who are 3-0, the Chargers who are 2-1, and then you've got the Chiefs, we're not the defending champions, but back-to-back Super Bowl appearances, champs 2 years ago, probably the early season favorite to win it all. They're 1-2. And we talk about the NFC West having the best division. The AFC West looks every bit just as good right now. And this is such a huge game. The 3-0 Raiders at the 2-1 Chargers. This is a game that, again, this might be a game that decides whether you make the playoffs or you don't. Who do you like in this Monday Night Football game? Because I think this is going to be a really close game. This last Monday night, we had a blowout. I expect to see a great football game. And this is kind of funny because if you look at in recent years, like if you think of teams that sort of like choke, who have talent and just don't deliver, and right when it seems like things are going their way, something bad happens. Well, both of these teams are that example. So it'll be interesting to see who sort of takes that next step and wins that game, because I think the winner of that game is in the driver's seat to make the playoffs.
Absolutely. I think that in order for the Chargers to make the playoffs, I'd say this is a little bit of a must win for them just because they need to keep a little bit of distance between themselves and Kansas City, because even at 1-2, I have every confidence that the Chiefs are going to be able to come back, win the division, and make a run in the playoffs. I think they've earned that benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise, until they
Sure.
prove otherwise with their play. So the Chargers, if they're sitting at 2-2 after losing to the now 4-0 Raiders, either 4-0 or 3-1 Broncos, and then the Chiefs probably going to be at 2-2 after playing the Eagles this week. I mean, I'm going to lean Chargers. I have these predilections. I typically tend to lean Chargers for whatever reason when I'm picking things, and I have for a good portion of my life. I don't know why. Even when it was Drew Brees and LT, then to Philip Rivers, and now on to Justin Herbert, I just kind of like the Chargers, generally speaking. And then I'll have to go back over the past couple of weeks and look at our pigskin pick'ems. But I don't know if I've picked the Raiders to win a single game this season, yet here they are at 3-0. For whatever reason, I just don't have that feeling toward the Raiders. So I'm going to let that cloud my judgment a little bit.
Sure.
I'm going to go with the Chargers to win this one at home. At this point, I don't expect the Raiders to win the game, but I kind of don't expect anything from them. And yet here they are showing up every single week.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of the opposite of you. I've always been the guy who
Yeah.
picks against the Chargers. And I mentioned it last week. When I've bet against the Chargers, I've actually been incredibly lucky and I've been incredibly right, except for last week. I had the Chiefs and locks of the week. I bet against the Chargers and I was wrong. And I think maybe this is the Chargers taking a next step, becoming a different franchise, because the last few years they've been a solid team. They've had the most close losses in the NFL. Well, all of a sudden, we saw them win a close game against a great team. And not only is Justin Herbert absolutely legit as the quarterback, I think a big key for them is their defense taking the next step. You look at how well they've played on defense. Week 1, they gave up 16 points against Washington. Week 2, 20 against the Cowboys. We talked about how great that Cowboys offense looks. And then week 3, 24 against the mighty Chiefs. I think they had 3 or 4 turnovers as well in that game. So arguably, perhaps the 2 best offenses in the NFL in Dallas and Kansas City, certainly if not the 2 best, 2 top 5 offenses in the NFL. I think obviously the Cardinals, the Bucks are in that discussion, the Rams also, and a few other teams, but the Bills as well. But 2 of the top 5 offenses, I think fair to say. They gave up 44 points against them. That speaks really, really well for their defense. And that's why I do like the Chargers in this game. I think they've got a little bit better defense than the Raiders. And I think the Raiders have been a little bit fortunate. I think they played well against the Ravens, but the Ravens sort of gave that game away. Mm-hmm. The Dolphins were on their backup quarterback. Granted, Jacoby Brissett might actually be better than Tua at this stage anyways, because he's a good quarterback. But I think Miami right now doesn't look like a great team. Baltimore is a good team, but maybe they're not as good as we thought. So some of their wins, I think, aren't as impressive. I know the win over Pittsburgh seemed like a big win at the time, but Pittsburgh is also really struggling. I think the Chargers are a little bit more legit. I do like the Chargers to win this game. I'm going to ask you this question, though. Mm-hmm. Say the Chargers do win and say the Broncos win, which is possible, even if they lose, they're 3-1. I mean, I think the Steelers probably not going to be a wild card team this year. I think the Patriots, we were thinking wild card, probably not going to be a wild card team. I think the Browns are going to win the division. The Ravens will be in the wild card hunt. But do you think we get 2 wild card teams out of the AFC West? I think we get at least 1, but do you think we can get 2?
That's going to come down entirely to whether or not the Broncos are a quote-unquote legitimate team. I mean, they've beaten the Giants, the Jaguars, and the Jets. They got a pretty tough stretch of teams coming up. So I think that really comes down to, if they can beat the Ravens at home, that's going to go a long way toward determining if the Broncos are legit. Because if you look at the past couple of wins that they've had, they've scored 27, 23, 26 points. They've allowed 13, 13, and 0. And again, they're going up against bad defenses and bad offenses. So if they can continue to win at that kind of rate against better teams, then absolutely we're going to get 2. But this week against Baltimore is going to be very telling if they just are going to be good at stomping on, everybody below them, and they're going to kind of hang tough with the teams around them, which means they could get a wild card, or if they're just going to be a very clear team that beats up, that bullies bad teams, and then is not going to have the firepower to beat the good ones. So definitely a possibility. I'd say a coin flip at this point, getting 2 wild card teams out of the AFC West. Just because, the South, you're probably just going to have the Titans. The East, probably just going to have the Patriots. So it really kind of comes
Bills.
down to,
You mean
yes,
the Bills?
I meant the Bills, yeah, with the Patriots and the Dolphins not looking great. So, yeah, it comes down to, is it going to be the Broncos or is it going to be somebody like
the Ravens?
Is it the Ravens? I think Ravens can probably win the division. It kind of comes down to, is it going to be the Browns or the Bengals? Is it going to be the state of Ohio showing up to spoil the party for the AFC West? We'll see. It's going to be really fun to watch.
You want to hear my controversial statement here? Since we've been pretty
Sure.
chalky.
So far, yeah.
Pretty chalky the whole show. So let's get a little bold here. Let's go unchalky. First off, the Broncos will finish last in their division.
Wow.
Secondly, there will be 2 wild card teams out of that division. I think the Chargers and Raiders are both going to be wild card teams. I also think the Browns will be division winners. So I think it's going to be very close. Mm-hmm. But if I have to make a pick, we're going to go bold. We're going to say they are going to get 2 teams. Just because you talk about tiebreakers. Well, the Raiders already have the tiebreaker on the Ravens. And I actually like the Chargers better than the Ravens at the moment. I think I actually really like the Chargers at this moment. Like, I like their football team. I think they're the most likely to be the wild card team. I think of all the teams in the wild card hunt, I like them better than the Raiders. I like them better than the Ravens, even the Browns, if they end up being in that area. I like the Chargers team right now. I like what they have. They've got a solid running back, a very good quarterback, good receivers, a good defense. So I've got them making the wild card, if not pushing the Chiefs for the division. I do think the Chiefs ultimately do win the division. I really like the Browns, though. I'll tell you this. I like the Browns football team. I know the Bears are terrible, but the Browns look so good, and they're muffed punt away from being 3-0 this season. I think their defense looks better this season. The running backs look as good as ever. Odell Beckham looked pretty solid week 1, and or week 3, but his first week playing, they can get anything out of him. That's a plus. So I like the Brownies winning the division, and I like the Chargers making the playoffs. How's that for two teams that are known to choke? So a lot of fun stuff, but I think I sort of said this the last couple of weeks, but there's more parity now than ever in the NFL. And I think it's the same way in college football, as we'll transition to that here in a second. In college football, I think you've got Alabama and Georgia, and then everyone else is about the same. I mean, honestly, I think Oregon's ranked number 3 in the country, but they struggled against an 0-3 Arizona team that I watched that game, by the way. The final score, not indicative of what the game was. So I think there's just so much parity in football right now, both at the NFL and college level, that we might have some fun games. We might have some upsets. And I think that, and here's another statement for you. I'll say this, Tom. By week 8 of the NFL season, we will have 0 undefeated teams by week 8, if not sooner. And I agree. I think we may have 0 defeated teams too, just because I think the Jets and Jaguars, they'll find a way to win somewhere. Maybe we have one of those teams keep losing, but I think we're not going to have anyone that's going to have no losses by week 8. And I don't think we're going to have anyone even with 2 losses. I think the best record this season, I think, will be 14-3, 13-4. I don't think we're going to have a Kansas City year that we had the previous season. I just don't see anyone dominating the competition. The one team that I could see doing it is the Bucs, because of how soft their schedule is. But overall, there's going to be a lot of parity this year. Do you want to move on to college, though?
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to probably the biggest game in college football this week, we have Arkansas, your darling beloved Razorbacks, upsetting Texas A&M.
I called that.
You did call it, and convinced me to go along for the ride with you as well. I wasn't quite so sold, but you laid out a pretty convincing argument, and coincidentally enough, so did the Arkansas Razorbacks. Now it kind of feels like they're taking yet another step up in weight class, going up against the Georgia Bulldogs, who just, I don't even know if Vanderbilt exists on the map at this point after that 62-0 win. My goodness.
What did I tell you on Locks of the Week? What did I tell you? I had Georgia covering 34. I said they'd be up at least 35 at half. I think they're up like 45 at half.
It was ridiculous. It was my brother-in-law, who got married over the weekend, Daniel, is actually an alum of Vanderbilt. So it's a good thing he was busy getting married and not paying attention to that game.
Yeah, he had more important things to worry about this weekend, and more positive things. So
much so, very much so. But in terms of
was the wedding good?
Game,
I saw you were at Fenway Park real quickly.
Oh man,
took a walk around Fenway Park. How was the Boston area? I almost didn't even realize that Mizzou was in that area playing Boston College. The Tigers, our alma mater, losing a heartbreaking game.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that either. So as I'm walking around the airport wearing my Mizzou hoodie, I'm seeing all this other Mizzou swag. I'm just like, what's going on? And people are like, giving me the MIZ. And I'm like, yeah, of course, ZOU. But like, it's just like, this is a little far east for some Mizzou. But no, the weekend itself was fantastic. Saw outside Fenway Park, walked around the bar and restaurant little village they have set up. Outside there, the Yankees were in town, so I made sure to go earlier in the day and avoid just all the hassle around the games at night.
Yankees got the sweep that week in Boston, too.
Definitely. We'll be touching on that later on in the show, so a nice tease there. A farther walk from downtown Boston, than I thought. We were pretty ambitious coming off the plane to walk all the way to Fenway and back, but
you got your steps in, man.
yeah, give or take 20,000 or so. But who's counting?
Oh.
You know, it
And let me
was.
ask you this: are you a dancer? Did you dance at the wedding? Are you a big dancer or not really?
I'm not a super big dancer. You know, we had some nice, slow dance, type of things,
Sure.
but no, as far as like, cutting up a rug, I'm not
You know
really
who?
big into that.
You know who's a big dancer? My girlfriend Allie. We were at a wedding
Really?
a couple weeks ago, and I got worn out. Like she just kept wanting to dance, and it's like you can't really say no. I'm sort of a dancer myself, but like I can do it. By dancer myself, I mean like I'm willing to dance. I'm not saying
Sure.
I'm any good.
This is a judgment-free zone
Right,
here.
exactly. So I was like, okay, well, I'll entertain her. We'll have some fun dancing. But she just kept dancing and dancing, and it was one of those weddings, which was also a pretty small wedding, but not a lot of dancers. Period. So like she was on the dance
Just
floor, like,
owning the floor.
sometimes just at times by herself. So I felt the need to like join her. So
Absolutely.
that was fun. Well, glad you enjoyed the wedding. Glad you
Mhm.
enjoyed the Boston area. Back to the football at hand, though. Arkansas, Georgia. Arkansas getting that upset over A&M. Any chance they do it again against Georgia or not so much? I mean, the line is 18.5. That's what's crazy. Given that it's the number 8 team in the country against number 2 in the country, how often do you
Mhm.
see an 18.5 point spread?
Absolutely. And I think it's simply because, as you mentioned at the top of the segment, it's Alabama, Georgia, and then kind of everybody else is in a different tier, a different sort of wash between, yeah, you get Iowa at 5 with Penn State at 4 and Oregon at 3, but
Way lower.
you can easily shuffle all of those things around as far as that goes. I mean, let's just like look at Georgia's schedule. They have a tight 10-3 victory over what we came into the season perceiving as a very good Clemson team.
We
And
were
then they just
wrong.
absolutely burn UAB, South Carolina, Vanderbilt. Georgia is borderline playing like the game between Vanderbilt and Georgia. I would describe it as they're almost not even playing the same game at that point.
No.
So that's why we have such a big line, I think, between Georgia and Arkansas, where Arkansas is going to be, a step up for Georgia as well. But it's tough for me to go against the Bulldogs. The way that they've played, the way that they, ground out a really tough win against the Clemson Tigers, and then just blew away everybody else. It'll be somewhere in between because I don't think Arkansas is as good as Clemson is. They're certainly better than Vanderbilt.
They might be better than Clemson, quite frankly. Clemson's 2-2.
Really?
They lost this weekend against NC State.
Oh,
and
I
they
completely
barely won
missed that
another
one.
game.
Oh,
Yeah.
my team, NC State. I like those guys.
Yeah, I
Wow,
actually
I
think
didn't know that.
Arkansas right now is probably better than Clemson. I completely gave too much hype to DJ. I don't know how to say his name, but their offense
Uiagalelei.
as a whole is in disarray. Their offensive line, I don't know what they're doing. I actually think Arkansas is better than Clemson right now. But you're talking about Georgia's dominance. Just to give you a couple stats, the first week their defense gives up 3 points against Clemson. Week 2, they give up 7 points against BYU. But how did those 7 points happen? A pick 6 by their offense. So the first 2 weeks they gave up 3 points, not a single touchdown. Then they gave up 13 points against South Carolina, one of those touchdowns being a garbage time touchdown, and then a 0 spot against Vandy. So their defense has given up 1 touchdown the whole season in the fourth quarter against an SEC team in, quite frankly, garbage time situation. I think that Georgia right now, we'll see how they do against better teams, but they have one of the best defenses I've ever seen, quite frankly. And I actually think, and I'll get your take maybe after we talk about Alabama Ole Miss, maybe we'll tease that because I didn't put this in the rundown, but I'm thinking like, who do we think is better, Alabama or Georgia? Let's tease that. I know we're not exactly prepared. I know it's early in the season, but it's just an interesting talking point because just my first thoughts on it is that Georgia is better than Alabama, but the quarterback position, I think they're much worse. So that's why it's close. But I think that Georgia's defense is so good that they just make it so hard on people. I do think Arkansas has better athletes than anyone they've faced. The Hogs putting up just under 36 points a game. 261 rush yards, 480 total yards. A&M had a great defense. Arkansas scored 20 against them. So their numbers look even better if you take out the Aggies game. So I think this is going to be very close as far as the line, the 18-point line. That's where I look at this game. Is Arkansas going to cover the line? Because I think Arkansas is definitely going to lose the football game, rather. That would be just an absolute shock if Georgia lost this game. But I think the Hogs, my best bet is that they do cover that line because they've got a good defense themselves. I look at this game being sort of like a 30-17 ball game, maybe 27-13, 27-14. I think Arkansas plays with them early, but Georgia's offensive line, their running game, their defense, ultimately too much to handle for Arkansas. But I think Barry Odom, Mizzou's former coach, a great defensive coordinator. I think he's going to draw up a game plan. And I think Georgia still is not elite to me at the quarterback position. That's their one weakness. So they won't be able to out-athlete Arkansas as much as they did Vanderbilt. So give me Georgia to win, Arkansas to cover.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I think until further notice, I'm kind of in the same line on Alabama as I am with Kansas City, where, Alabama, they've had a couple of closer calls, or at least one closer call with the Florida Gators. But as far as who's better, I got to give a slight edge to the quarterback play just because that's just going to be the differentiator,
Bryce Young gets 15 touchdowns so far this season. Alabama's given up 13, 14 points against some lower level teams, but again, some of that has been in garbage time. It's close. I can't wait to see them play each other. I'm leaning Alabama because until proven otherwise, like you said, Alabama's top dog, but I think Georgia has a legitimate chance. If that line comes out to like 3 to 4 points, I'll probably take Georgia to cover.
Absolutely.
And I'm talking about the SEC championship game because it seems like a foregone conclusion. And let me ask you this. I mean, here's another question to think about. Like, let's just assume that SEC title game is close. Let's just assume some of these other teams like an Oregon, a Penn State, Iowa, like they're not as convincing as it seems. Could you argue that Georgia, a one-loss team, losing the conference championship, or Alabama, vice versa, should get the number 2 overall seed? Because I think so. I think you lose the SEC title game, I would give those teams the number 2 overall seed. I think it should be Alabama, Georgia, 1-2 all the way, as long as it's not a 4. If they get to 3, I can survive. But I think that we're going to see them play each other in the SEC title game, then in the national championship a few weeks later, or I guess a month later because there's a break. But
that all depends on kind of how the rest of the teams do. If you have an undefeated Oregon team atop the Pac-12, I think that the committee would basically say 2 or 3 doesn't really matter as far as the seeding goes. So just from an optical perspective, they would probably put Georgia at 3, just so it looks a little nicer in terms of you have the SEC winner and runner-up somehow above a Pac-12, an undefeated Pac-12 winner, a potential undefeated Big Ten winner, a potential undefeated Big 12 winner. I think that's probably how the committee would do it, just to kind of soft pedal a little bit of that. But I think that as much as I'm a fan of the resume in terms of if you are undefeated and win your conference, you should be in the playoff, I absolutely believe that. This might be the one year that makes me think exception to the rule because Georgia and Alabama seem so much better than everyone else. The real trick is going to be, with some of these other games coming up, Georgia having a tough matchup against Arkansas, Alabama moving over to them against Ole Miss. I think Alabama, they're definitely favored to win. I think they will win, but Ole Miss is just another team on the schedule that is a ranked team, that is a quality opponent of many that Alabama is going to have to face this year. I believe they're also going to be facing are they facing Arkansas later in the year? I believe Alabama is. They're going to have a lot of tough games. They're also playing A&M. They're also going to have, of course, the Iron Bowl against an Auburn team that's currently ranked but toward the bottom, so they could be in or out.
Barely beat Georgia State.
So it's going to be really interesting to see if we're even going to we have this foregone conclusion of two undefeated teams, but the way the schedules play out and the way that we've seen upsets and parity in both college and professional football, I don't know. Is Ole Miss perhaps the week that Alabama might fall a little short?
Yes, I'll give you the first Ole Miss Alabama preview. I think this game is going to be interesting because it's going to tell us how good is Alabama's defense, because they gave up 48 against Ole Miss last season, still won by 15, 31 points against them 2 years ago in a rout. Ole Miss, by the way, putting up 53 points per game, more than Alabama at 46 and a half. Surprisingly, Ole Miss allowing just 21 points a game, but they haven't played the best schedule so far. Mm-hmm. I do remember, if you remember this, when we did our preseason preview, and I'll backpedal by telling you that I was completely wrong on Clemson, so I'm not going to toot my horn too much, but I did give Ole Miss as the surprise team heading into the season, as a team that I thought would be in the top 20, that was ranked outside the top 25. I was right on Ole Miss. I definitely talked about how they have everyone vaccinated in their program. I think that helps them. They've got an excellent quarterback, an excellent coach in Lane Kiffin. Talk about a redemption story. He's really got himself going now as a head coach. They've got a really good program. I think that line is 14 and a half. I think Ole Miss is going to cover that line. I think Alabama is going to ultimately win the game because Alabama has a much better defense than Ole Miss. But I think that Ole Miss is a good team. And I think here's another controversial statement for you, Tom Castleman. You're talking about undefeated Pac-12, undefeated Big 12, undefeated Big 10. I haven't seen enough of Iowa yet, but I have read the scores. I have actually seen Oregon. I've seen Oklahoma. I've seen Penn State. I've watched all those games on TV, not in person, but I've seen all three of those teams. My off days now with my new job are Saturday, so I actually watched quite a few college football games last Saturday. By the way, doing more sports podcast talking for my job. I love talking sports, so be sure to check out Ultimate Autographs. We are breaking sports memorabilia on the Ultimate Autographs Facebook, Twitter, YouTube pages, Twitch, and everything. I think I'm on there every Monday night at 7, Thursday night at 7, Friday night at 7, then Sunday at 2 and 8 p.m. So a lot of good opportunities to watch that. But enough of tooting my horn. Back to football, though. My statement is that we're going to have one undefeated team this season in college football entering bowl season. I think Oregon, even though the Pac-12 is not great, their schedule's easy, Oregon is not that great. They're about as weak of a number 3 overall team that I've seen in my entire life. Penn State, not that great. Penn State will lose. Iowa will lose. Oklahoma, they've been the most disappointing team, actually, well, second most behind Clemson. Oklahoma's going to lose a football game. They look like a mess right now. They should have already lost one, quite frankly. So I think that it's going to come down to one undefeated team, either Alabama or Georgia, whoever wins the SEC title game. I think the Tide is going to beat Ole Miss. Georgia's going to take care of Arkansas. Those games may be closer than the line suggests, but I think we're going to have no undefeated teams other than Alabama or Georgia. But I'll give you one other game we want to hit on before we move to Locks of the Week. Probably the most evenly matched game of top 25 teams. I think Oklahoma and State and Baylor also like 19 and 21, but the Big 12 is a mess. That game's not interesting enough to talk about. The game that I do want to talk about is Cincinnati and Notre Dame. I think this is what Cincinnati's ranked number 7, Notre Dame's number 8. At Notre Dame, Cincinnati, like a 2.5 point favorite. I know who you're picking. I know who I'm picking. So you lay out the argument for your team, and then I'll disagree with you. Because I'll say this, because we're talking about the Pac-12, Big 10, like the door is open for Notre Dame and Cincinnati if one of those teams does go undefeated. And even if they get one loss, given that they both played a pretty tough schedule, the door is open for those teams to make a playoff. I think whoever loses this game is out of the playoff discussion, but the winner is very much in the discussion.
Yeah, no, I think that it's definitely a stronger argument for Notre Dame. I'll grant you that. I'm going more on emotion and what I want to have happen as opposed to what I think will happen necessarily. I mean, at the very least, you can only play the teams that are on your schedule, and Cincinnati has done that and done that well. winning against Miami, Ohio, 49-14, against Murray State, 42-7, over a team that was at one point ranked with Indiana, 38-24. So all of these are multi-possessional wins for the Cincinnati Bearcats. So they've looked convincing against the teams against whom they should, in fact, look convincing. I think that this is easily, by far and away, the biggest game that Cincinnati has had this season. Perhaps, and I know that they were in a bowl game last year, perhaps bigger than any game that they've had in program history, simply because if they beat Notre Dame on the road, this is their last opportunity to showcase themselves. This is really their only opportunity, quite frankly, to showcase themselves for the College Football Playoff Committee, because if you look at the rest of the schedule, not a single team is ranked. You got teams like UCF, Navy, South Florida, SMU, teams that, quite
SMU
frankly,
is good this year, though.
They're good, but they're not ranked, is what I'm saying. They're not going to be on the level.
But I agree with you, absolutely.
So that's what it's really going to come down to is, I want Cincinnati to win because I want to see them get that fourth spot. I want to have, at least to be in the conversation as a team that is going to be undefeated going into bowl season. An Indiana Hoosiers team that started out, preseason was ranked, but with a loss to Iowa and then their loss to Cincinnati has fallen out of the top 25. So I'm going with Cincinnati. I'm going with heart over head on this one because Notre Dame has looked pretty good, had a nice convincing win last week.
I picked that one too.
Had a close game against Florida State, but that could also just be attributed to it's early in the season. They're still figuring things out. But after, they had a big win against Wisconsin. So, yeah, I think Notre Dame can make a better case, but I'm going to stick with Cincinnati because Bearcats. Yeah.
So I am going to make the better case for Notre Dame. First off, I do think it's crazy that Cincinnati's a 2.5-point favorite. That to me is a little scary. And that's one of those things where it's like, does Vegas know something that I don't? Because Vegas tends to know about some of these lines. Although they didn't know about Notre Dame last week, they were a 6.5-point underdog against Wisconsin. I had that correct in locks of the week. They won 41-13. I will say that game was close to three quarters. It was really the fourth quarter, late in the third, that it got out of hand. The final score, not quite indicative of the game. But Notre Dame, I think, was basically on their third-string quarterback and was still playing really good because I think their backup was hurt and then the starter got hurt. But I like Notre Dame in this game just because they've got a lot of five-star recruits. They lost so many starters from last season. So them struggling early on in the season, I equate that more to their young guys getting used to things. We saw them week 3 play better against Purdue, a 14-point win. And then they beat a number 18 Wisconsin. I do think Wisconsin probably overhyped at that ranking, but still a 41-13 win against a good team on a neutral field. I think that was a statement for Notre Dame. So I do like where they're headed. And I think that Kyren Williams, their running back, who's really, really good, has not gotten going this season. What Wisconsin is great at is stopping the run. So that wasn't the right game to get him going. I think they get him going this game against Cincinnati. I think Williams has a big game. And I think the Fighting Irish take down Cincinnati and put themselves squarely in the playoff picture. And I think come the end of things, I would not be shocked to see Notre Dame as the number 4 seed in the playoffs. I think it'll be between Oklahoma and Notre Dame for me for that final spot. I think we got the Alabama and Georgia for sure. And then I think the Big Ten is going to get messy. There's a lot of the Big Ten has a lot of good teams, not a lot of great teams. But I think the Iowa and the Penn States, and there's Ohio State, and there's Michigan, who's playing good. I think those teams are going to beat up on each other. And I think the Big Ten is going to get very, very messy. And I think the Big Ten is going to be short this season. So we'll see what happens. But I will be looking forward to a fun week of college football and an incredible week of NFL football.
Absolutely. Week 5 already talk about playoff implications. Well, we're many, many, many more weeks into the Major League Baseball season. In fact, we're just about to wrap that up with the last week of the regular season coming up. And so we pretty much have all the division winners figured out in the American League. But of course, the wild card spot, and I talked about this, I think it was last week or maybe a couple of weeks ago, that this really shouldn't even be a thing. with multiple teams vying for that one-game playoff. But I will grant you it does add some excitement to the game. Currently, the Yankees have the advantage with the top wild card spot. They're a game ahead of the Boston Red Sox, who hold the second wild card spot.
Isn't it the other way around?
No, Yankees have a game ahead of the Boston Red Sox currently after sweeping them this past weekend. But we have another American League East team, the Toronto Blue Jays, 1 game back of the Red Sox, Seattle Mariners a game and a half back. And then, I mean, nominally, maybe Oakland's technically in the running at 3.5, but they need a lot of things to go their way for it to even make it happen. So really, we're talking about 4 teams vying for a single play-in game.
Right,
what are your thoughts on this?
2 spots, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so first off, I think the Yankees are going to be the one to make it. I think they've got the 1-game lead, as you mentioned. I think they've got the most room for error, as you would say. I think they're the hottest. They're 7-3 in their last 10. Where it gets interesting is they play the Blue Jays the next 3 days here. We're recording on a Tuesday night. I think that game is about to first pitch is probably underway or already about to be underway.
Yep.
So I think the Blue Jays have a chance if they can beat the Yankees. If they sweep them, quite frankly, they'll be in there. But I think the Blue Jays are 5-5 in their last 10. The Yankees 7-3. I like New York to take 2 out of 3 in that series. And I like Boston also, who Boston, by the way, their road games. But Boston has a winning record on the road. They play the Orioles, who have, I think, tied for the worst record in baseball. And then they play the Nationals, who have a pretty bad record as well. So I think MLB baseball is probably going to get the dream that it wants, a Yankees-Red Sox 1-game playoff. I do think the Blue Jays, as I mentioned, they have a chance if they can win the series against New York. But I don't think they're going to do it. I think the Mariners actually have probably the best opportunity to upend either the Red Sox or Yankees. They haven't been in the playoffs since, I think, 2000 or 2001, when they had, I think, the best record ever. And the White Sox beat them, I think that was, with Ichiro. And I think the White Sox had, like, Harold
Yankees
Baines.
beat them that year.
Oh, the Yankees beat them.
Yep.
That's right. So the Yankees beat them. Yeah. But nonetheless, like, the Mariners have a chance because all of their games on the stretch are at home. They do play the A's, who are a tough team, but the A's are just about eliminated right now. And the Mariners beat them 13-4 last night. So they matched up pretty well last night against them, at least. And then they play the Angels the last 3 games of the season. Angels have sort of like nailed it in. So I think Mariners, have a chance. Blue Jays have a chance. I would put the Mariners as 3rd. Blue Jays is 4th. I think the Yankees and Red Sox, I know they're the big name teams, but they're the ones in the lead right now, and they're the ones with the best players. The Yankees, by the way, I know they play the Blue Jays, who are tough, but then they play the Rays the last 3 games of the season, which looks like a tough matchup, but quite frankly, it isn't. The Rays would have already clinched the number 1 seed in the American League by then. I think their magic number is like 1 against the Astros, and they play each other now. So barring something crazy, the Rays are going to be the 1 seed. Already clinched heading into that weekend. And barring something crazy, I think they're a couple games back of the Dodgers and a couple more back of the Giants. So they're very unlikely for the best overall seed in baseball. So they're probably going to use that weekend as a chance to rest their starters, rest their players. So New York is actually going to be going up against a fairly easy team. So give me the Yankees, give me the Red Sox, and then give me the Yankees to beat the Red Sox in the 1-game playoff.
Yeah, I think you have it pegged pretty well as Yankees and Red Sox as the most likely teams. It really comes down to is Toronto at home really capable of upending the Yankees. They're going up against Jameson Taillon tonight, and then tomorrow it's Garrett Cole followed by Corey Kluber. So it's going to be a tough set of pitching matchups.
They need this game because they're not going to beat Garrett Cole. They need this game tonight as a must-win.
Absolutely. So that's going to be the challenge for Toronto. They're going to have to earn their way in. But if they are somehow able to take 2 out of 3, maybe they drop back into Cole. If they win the other 2, they've got Baltimore for the next 3 games. So Toronto is very much in this one. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we had Toronto and Boston, simply because Boston has Baltimore and Washington, and then the Yankees. Tampa Bay could be resting players, but at the same time, you don't want to have rust heading into the playoffs. Sure. You want to be firing on all cylinders because baseball is such a, one weird bounce, this side of the line or another. It's just a weird playoff structure or a weird playoff setting where you can just randomly have a player, say like Jeff Blum in 2005, who comes in, pinch hits, game-winning home run type of thing. You want to be having everybody going as best as they can going into the playoffs. So I think Yankees and Red Sox is probably the most likely, but I'm going to cheer for Toronto just because, what a story for them not being able to play at home. I believe that this weekend they actually are in the Rogers Center, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so.
They were able to make it back into Canada for at least a couple games. So what a story for them having to play not even really, any true home games in Buffalo, New York. I know it's close geographically, but I think it'd be a great story if Toronto were able to steal away a wild card spot as well. So
I got
a lot of fun for the last week of the season for sure.
I got two quick things before we go over the National League real fast, which is I think more obvious, not long discussion there, but
right.
I've got a solution for you for the wild cards, and I've got a statement about the Blue Jays. I don't think the Blue Jays quite make it this season, but they're here to stay. Vlad Guerrero Jr., I think they got Biggio, Bichette, the sons of former Major League stars. They've got a young team, and it is interesting to note that they've got a much better run differential than the Yankees. Much better, I think, better than the Red Sox even. Like, they've pounded some teams. For them, it's winning the close games. And I think the Yankees will have the edge in the close games the next few days. But I think Blue Jays are here to stay. As far as the wild card, here's the solution for you. Make it a best of three. Just make it a little bit less luck involved. And then those teams down the stretch, instead of resting their guys, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they throw all their starters. They get a few extra days off with those teams having played. Also, not that in baseball, travel and being tired is as much of a factor, but I'd argue that if you do have a 3-game series, you might end up throwing some of your better pitchers more. That way, the wild card teams, in a way, are also in a little bit more of a disadvantage against the other teams. Although, again, I don't think it should be the two lowest records playing that game, not the wild cards, because as we've talked about, the Giants, I think, are 2 games ahead of the Dodgers, best record in baseball. Dodgers, defending champs, second best record in baseball, will probably have to play in a wild card game. I think the Giants 2 games ahead. Any chance the Giants blow that lead, or rather the Dodgers blow that lead? Also, any chance that the Braves blow their lead in the NL East? Anything crazy in the National League, or you think pretty much Giants hang on, Braves hang on, and they make the playoffs? Because I think the wild cards are set in the National League. It's going to be the Cardinals, and then most likely the Dodgers or Giants.
Yeah, the thing with the Giants is Brandon Belt, their first baseman, just suffered an injury, so they're going to be definitely pressed to make sure that they maintain that divisional lead and win the division, so that they get a little extra time off to try to get healthy, but also that they are guaranteed a 5-game series. I think that the Braves are definitely going to have to earn their way in. They've got a pivotal series going up against Philadelphia. You have Zach Wheeler, who's potentially on the fringes of the Cy Young conversation out in the National League. It's not going to be easy. Philadelphia is playing for this division as well, but if the Braves can take 2 out of 3, I think they pretty much cruise to a division title, as they'll be facing New York at home. If they drop 2 out of 3, well, they're still going to be facing 3 games against the New York Mets at home. So they absolutely have that opportunity to cinch everything up. I mostly see it going pretty, chalky on this one. Whoever is the winner. I mean, the thing that I hate about the 1-game playoff is that we very well could have, Dodgers, Cardinals, and then the Cardinals just happen to win 1 game. And because of that,
do they still have their winning streak? I think it was
16 in a row.
16
they're
in a row. So
they're on a roll.
They're hot.
It would just be so awful. Like, literally everybody outside of St. Louis and maybe the surrounding suburbs of Missouri are going to be ticked off as all get out if the Cardinals end up advancing over the LA Dodgers. Hyperbole to say an all-time great team, but they've won 100 games. They deserve a 3-game series. And if you want to talk about the excitement of the wild card race, we still have, the Yankees up a game. We've got Boston 1 game behind them, Toronto 2 games behind, interdivisional toward the end. there's still plenty of excitement, even if we don't have this one game playoff. And then the Cardinals are just, this fluky, 116 in a row out of 162. Well, they should have won more earlier, quite frankly, if they wanted to be getting that wild card spot. So I'm going with chalk on this one. I'm sticking Braves. I'm going to stick with Dodgers winning the playoff or the play-in game because I think the Giants can probably hold on to the division.
They will. Yeah, I agree. I think we're set on that. We'll talk about sort of our baseball playoff projections next week. I think by the time we do the show, the wild card games might be done. And I think it'd be easier if they're done, so we don't end up picking the Dodgers, who might end up losing. So we'll talk about more in detail MLB playoffs next week. Well, let's hop straight into locks of the week.
Absolutely.
Quite a recap from last week. We'll start with Drew Brackett, our own guru, the undefeated Drew Brackett. So he had the Bills -9 over Washington. The Bills winning 43-21, got that easily. Rams +1.5 against the Bucks, got that one easily as well. Rams winning by 10. Quite frankly, we're up 17 late. Vikings +2 against the Seahawks, got that one easily, winning 30-17. And then you had Chargers +6.5 at the Chiefs. The Chargers winning by 6. Then Everton, Norwich City under 2.5 goals. Correct, Everton winning 2-0. So he not only went 5-0, but 4 of those locks were absolutely convincing. The soccer one was probably the only one that he had to sweat it out. The rest were really, really smooth picks. Solid week for me. Started off really well, didn't finish as well. I had in college football, I did great. I had Notre Dame +6.5 against Wisconsin. They won 41-13. Georgia -34 at Vanderbilt. Georgia winning 62-0. So my college picks were right on the money. NFL, I had the Cardinals -7.5 at the Jaguars. They won 31-19. And then I missed on the Chiefs against the Chargers. And I had Ravens -8 at the Lions. The Ravens only winning by 2. 3-2 week for me. 2-3 week for you, Tom. Titans -5.5 over the Colts. You got that one right. They won by 19. Patriots -3 over the Saints. That one went really poorly. Saints winning by 15. Seahawks -2 at the Vikings. Vikings winning outright 30-17. Eagles, Cowboys over 52 points. You got that one easily, 41-21. I believe 62 total points, if my math is right. And then I told you not to bet on the Cubs beating the Twins. I told you not to do it. You didn't listen. The Twins winning 9-5. So as has been the case, you and I pretty much the last year have been right around the 500 mark. We're both right around there. Drew Brackett was well below 500 last season, but he's off to a hot start in season 2 of Locks of the Week. He is 5-0 last week, and he is 10-4-1 on the season. So I'll give you Drew's picks real quickly before I let you hop into your picks. I've got an all NFL card this week, by the way. So I probably should have bet more college after going 2-0 last week, but I was feeling NFL. So this is what Drew has. So this is how Drew Brackett structures his bets. So you know, going forward, he picks 1 Premier League under, and then he picks 4 NFL games. We agreed on picking 3 out of the 5 locks to be NFL. So his Premier League under, Burnley and Norwich City under 2.5 goals. That certainly sounds smart. Then he has the Falcons +1 over Washington. A matchup of 2 bad teams. But Drew did have the Falcons and can pick them over the Giants last week. Bears -3.5 over the Lions. So, all right. As Bears fans, that's good to hear if Mr. NFL Guru is backing Chicago. And he has the Panthers +5 against the Cowboys. That one's surprising for a big Cowboys fan. But I like Dallas to win that game. I can see the Panthers covering. That one will be close. And then he has the Broncos -1.5 over the Ravens, making me question my picks. So what do you have, Tom?
Well, knowing Drew's picks, I won't change mine now, but he certainly is giving me some cause for pause. So
yeah, no kidding.
So I'll start with first an NFL over. Give me yes on over 52 points between the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers. Common, we talked about it earlier with Seattle's defense being atrocious. In order for them to win the game, I know you always have to score more points, but in this case, their offense is really going to have to score more points than the San Francisco 49ers, and then the Niners are going to be putting up points just because Seattle's defense doesn't seem particularly inclined to stop anybody. So I think over 52 points for that. Give me the Buccaneers covering 7 over the Patriots in Foxborough. We talked about, a good pass defense for New England. But Tampa Bay has just a lot of weapons all over the place on offense. And then the X factor is going to be, what is their defense going to scheme up? What is Todd Bowles going to be able to bring in a pressure front against Mac Jones to confuse the rookie? So I'd like the Bucs to win or to cover 7. And then here's where I'm going to start to differ with Drew.
Uh-oh.
I do have the Cowboys. It was 4.5 when I found it. It's at -5 now. So Cowboys over the Panthers. We'll see how that one goes. And then I actually have Washington just winning outright, -125 for that. I'm not messing around with the points there. I'll give up a little bit of value to just not have to have that one on my mind. So that's 4 NFL picks. And then at -130, give me Dodgers over 4 runs. Yu Darvish has a horrible home road split. His ERA in the second half is over 6. So Dodgers over 4 runs. You can get that for -130 at Bovada. Last I checked, if you want to take them -1.5, you can get that at even money. But I'm not going to be messing around with bullpens or explosive offenses from San Diego. I'm going to focus just on the Dodgers offense against Yu Darvish and the San Diego bullpen.
Yeah, real fast. The Padres, probably the most disappointing team in baseball. Started hot, a lot of expectations, a lot of talent. They're right around 500. Will not be making the playoffs. Granted, they played in a tough division, but still very disappointing season for them. As far as my locks of the week, I'll go Bucks -7 at the Patriots. I agree with you. I actually had it at 6.5 earlier on DraftKings. Just hopped on the compare. It's 7 there as well.
It's already moved, yeah.
It's already moved to 7, but I'll go ahead and take those points. Let me shift my thing over here so we see Messi enough. By the way, Lionel Messi scored his first goal for PSG today in a 2-0 PSG Champions League win over Man City. That had me fired up. But back to my locks of the week, as I said, Bucks -7 at the Patriots. Bucks scoring 34 points a game. Patriots just 18 a game. New England doesn't have enough firepower to keep up with the Bucks and Brady and Godwin and Evans, Gronkowski and company. I think the Bucks win by more than 7 in Brady's return at New England against Belichick. We talked about it plenty at the start of the show. He's going to make a statement. He's going to set the all-time passing yards record in that game, and he's going to have himself quite the night. Then I like the Browns -2 at the Vikings. I think this is a bad matchup for the Vikings' run defense. They struggled giving up 119 rush yards per game. That's tied for 20th in the NFL. The Browns averaging 174.7 rushing yards, a close second to the Ravens for most rush yards a game. They had over 200 against the Bears this last week, nearly had 2 100-yard rushers in Chubb and Hunt, just under for both. I think Cleveland, granted, against some bad teams, but they have played better on defense this season. And as I said earlier in the show, they're a punter's mistake away from being 3-0. Vikings 1-2. I know they had a heartbreaking loss a couple weeks ago, a big win last week. I know it's a road game, but a 2-point spread isn't much to cover. I like the Browns winning by a field goal or more. And then I'm going to hop on some of the bad teams in the NFL and just go against them. So I'll have the Titans -7.5 at the Jets, the two teams going in opposite directions. The Titans now 2-1, 2 straight wins. The Jets are 0-3. They lost 25-6 against the Patriots, 26-0 against the Broncos. They've scored just 20 points in 3 games this season. Titans had a great comeback win at Seattle. then beat the Colts by 9. They've got a great running game, a passing game that's very good. Hasn't played up to par just yet, but they're going to in this one. The Jets can't keep up with the Titans offense. They've combined for 6 points the last 2 games. I think they'll get more than 6, but they'll have to get a lot more than 6 to cover that 7.5 spread. So I like the Titans covering there. Then I'm going to go to the team that has been big for me all year, the Jaguars. I've faded them. I've bet on them 2 out of 3 weeks so far in locks of the week. I had them losing against the Texans week 1. They did somehow favored in that game, which was beyond me. And then I had them losing last week, not covering against the Cardinals. They didn't cover that one either. They're 0-3. I think they're 0-3 against the spread as well, at least 1-2. So the Jags have lost by 16 week 1, by 10 week 2, by 12 week 3. So they've lost by double digits every game so far this season. I see that trend continuing. The Bengals coming off a huge 24-10 win at the Steelers. I know the Steelers aren't the same team, but anytime the Bengals or Browns can beat the Steelers, it's a huge moment. I like what Joe Burrow's doing. I like his relationship with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. They've got some good targets there. So I like the Bengals winning by 8 or more, and I like them moving to 3-1. Drew Brackett, Mr. NFL Guru, told us in our preseason picks, don't forget about the Bengals. Well, Drew, I'm not forgetting about the Bengals. And then speaking of other teams who I've been kind of trashing on all show, what about the Seahawks and that last ranked defense in the NFL, total defense? This line, I think, has moved to 3. I had it at 2.5 earlier, but I'll go ahead and do it -3 anyways. 49ers -3 over the Seahawks. The 49ers got a better defense. They've got a better team. Even despite some injuries, they're at home. It's a big game for them. I like San Francisco winning by more than 3.
So a couple notes on some of the numbers and everything. First off, I agree with you on the Browns. They were one of the maybes that I had tucked away. We're also kind of on the same page with the Titans. I'm not sure with, it's going to be a lower scoring game. Maybe there's a backdoor cover. I kind of like the Titans over 27.5 points. That was kind of a nice number that I was looking at. So we're on the same page for a lot of these. As far as the lines go, so for Drew, like we've been doing this the past couple of weeks where we're doing just like the best line available.
Sure.
Currently on Bovada, Broncos are -1 over the Ravens. The Falcons are at +1.5. So, of course, both lines move a little bit in Drew's favor. And then he had the Bears at -3.5. Bears are now actually at -3. So, Drew catching, since we're doing this as of airtime, Drew catching a little bit of a benefit on that. So we'll make note of that.
He doesn't even need it, but that's fine.
He does not need it, but we will give it to him anyway. So he now is Broncos -1, Bears -3, Falcons +1.5. So Drew and I going head to head on a couple of these. I don't know. Well, there is some room for compromise on that Falcons Washington football team game. If Washington wins by exactly 1 point, we can both go home happy. So
the likelihood of that is not very high, but you never know.
Not very high. We'll cheer for it anyway. Moving on to salute statements, trivia for the week. Just a really quick salute out to Andy Reid. Went to the hospital after the Chiefs' loss on Sunday. By all accounts, I believe latest reports had him actually in team facilities at meetings. So thankfully, a health scare avoided for probably just my favorite overall NFL head coach of all time. I just really enjoy Andy Reid. So glad to hear that the incident was minor, that he just wasn't feeling well, and is back to, for all intents and purposes, good health. So that's the salute for the week is to Andy Reid.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Andy Reid is a good guy. So I've got real quick before I get into statements. I don't know if you've got a statement. I've got a trivia question for you. I don't know if you had one prepared, but I've got a really good one for you. And it's really tricky. And this actually comes from my new job. Someone asked it where we sort of sell sports memorabilia. There's a lot of people in the chat who love to throw trivia questions at us. So this is a a repeat trivia question from, I believe, Dusty. I don't think he's listening to the podcast, but just in case that he is, Dusty, thanks for this trivia question. This is a very, very tricky question, extremely tricky. And I'll give you what the trick is. So here's the question. What NFL division has no quarterbacks who were drafted in the top 5? And here's the trick. Because there is one division right now that has 4 starters. None of them are in the top 5, but the backup quarterback for one of the teams was a top 5 pick. And the answer to the question, here's your second clue. The answer to the question that this division that has no quarterbacks in the entire division who are drafted in the top 5 overall, one of the quarterbacks was number 6 overall. There's your second clue. So one division in the National Football League currently has no quarterbacks in the entire division that were drafted in the top 5. Because my original guess, by the way, was almost exact, but the trick question got me. So the original guess that I made was right in that none of the 4 starters in that division were top 5 picks, but the backup QB was a top 5 pick.
Okay, so my initial guess is the NFC East.
Okay.
Because Dak was a 4th rounder. Daniel Jones was drafted 6 overall. Heineke and Ryan Fitzpatrick undrafted. Jalen Hurts was a 2nd round pick. So now I got to think about the backups for each of those teams. So yeah, I'm going to stick with NFC East. I might be tripped up.
Right on. No, you're right. You got it. Really impressed. Maybe I shouldn't have given you the clues. Last few weeks, you needed clues to get my trivia questions right. You are right on. Here's the tricky one, because this is the one that I went with off the top of my head. The AFC West. Mahomes was, I think, 10th overall.
Sure.
Justin Herbert was 6th overall, and I knew that, or 7th maybe. I knew he wasn't top 5. Then you've got Derek Carr, I think, was a 2nd round pick.
He was.
And then we had the Broncos. Teddy Bridgewater, I think, was definitely not top 5. Drew Lock
he's like
was not top 5.
29th or something like that.
But the tricky part was that Marcus Mariota, the backup in Oakland, was number 2 overall behind famous Jameis. So,
wow.
Do you have a quick trivia question, or did you not have?
I have not had time to prepare one. No.
No, you're good. I had a fun one. So, my statement of the week, I'm going to keep this kind of brief, just because we can go on. You and I can go on and on for this, and every Bears fan can go on with this. Obviously, Matt Nagy, time for him to go. But I'm going to make the statement a little bit different. I'm going to make it that the Bears are the most stubborn organization in the history of sports right now. They were stubborn to keep Matt Nagy. Matt Nagy was stubborn to keep Andy Dalton. And now they're stubborn holding on to him. The city of Chicago is so mad at him. By the way, I don't know if you saw his press conference. He said that it might be Nick Foles, Andy Dalton, or Justin Fields starting this week. And it doesn't matter who starts, quite frankly, because if you can't block and you can't make passes and you can't run the ball, you can't win the games. But my statement is that the Bears are very stubborn. They've been stubborn with Nagy. He's been stubborn more than anything, more than the quarterback competition. The thing he's been most stubborn about is calling the plays. And we've kind of heard him like mulling it over the last year. I think he might have briefly given it up at one point, but he seems to not want to give up the play calling. He wants to be the play caller, and he's atrocious at it. So he needs to give up the play calls. The ownership needs to give up on him. So I think it's just a trail of stubbornness with the Bears organization. And until they're ready to move on from Matt Nagy, and they just need a fresh start. They need a fresh start in general. They're going to keep losing, and it may not be pretty. And of all of Drew's locks, the one that I feel least good about was that Bears-Lions game. So maybe he had an 0-5 week. Maybe he'll be 0-5. We're giving him all the tooting of the horn. So we'll see. But I think we're probably on the same page here. But the stubbornness of the Bears, and I saw something on Twitter where they liked like his press conference on, I can't remember if it was YouTube or Facebook, but it had like 3 likes and 125 dislikes. So I think
sounds about right.
The fans in Chicago have spoken. I know you kind of wanted him back at one point. I
Mm-hmm.
just don't think he's a very smart coach. I do think the players want to play for him, but I think that he was very fortunate to go 8-8 last season, and I think that it's time for him to go, and it's time for the Bears to just stop being stubborn. I'm tired of it.
I mean, stubborn is almost a compliment compared to what the adjective that I would use, because stubborn uh, leads me to believe that they know what they're doing and are sticking with it. I think they're more clueless
They are
than anything
clueless.
else. I think like if we look at a lot of the team's problems, I think Matt Nagy himself is stubborn when it comes to it's not enough for that he to win a game. It has to be won his way,
Sure.
his style. It's about him, not the team. I think Ryan Pace is relative. Like he has shortcomings. He's really good in some areas. Drafting for defense, finding value on defense has been one of them. But then he makes that the double down mistake of investing resources in defense. And we look at how did Kansas City lose the Super Bowl last year. It was having a less than standard offensive line, which at the beginning of the season was a decent level, but
They
then
had
there was no
injuries, though.
depth.
They
There
had
was no
injuries.
depth. You got
They
to
need
build that
depth.
sort of thing up.
Sure.
Matt Nagy, like coming into the season, the Chicago Bears are where the Chiefs were when the Super Bowl started. That's after playing 18 games.
Sure.
So it's absolutely one of those things where I was kind of on board with bringing back Matt Nagy at the end of last season because I thought that I saw some positive things when he did give up play calling. Things seemed to flow a little bit
Yeah,
better.
but he took it
And
back.
exactly. That's the thing where coming into the season, I thought that was a mistake, and even more egregious was not putting his rookie quarterback in a position to succeed.
Are you cynical? Some people are saying that he devised the game plan for Fields to fail just so we can say that Fields shouldn't be starting.
If so, that is an organizational malpractice because
Sure.
that means
And
that he's received some sort of wink, nod, handshake guarantee that this isn't a make or break year for him, which is
bad in itself.
which is horrible in itself when it comes to ownership,
And
just kind of rubber stamping the
I
season
don't know that
regardless of how
I
it
don't know
goes.
that he did that, and I'm always one
No.
that believes in coaches,
Mm-mm.
players being more important than coaches. But the way the NFL rules are structured, the way that it's a passing league, it's a points league, to not get a touchdown in an NFL football game, to literally score 3 points is really, really bad. I think they gave up like 4.5 sacks alone to Myles Garrett.
Yep.
I think they gave up 8 or
9
9.
total.
I can't remember what the total. 9 total.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's just really, really, really bad. And I think that yeah, they've got so many issues that they've got to figure out. And
yeah, and
I think he survives this season, but I would have fired him a couple weeks ago.
Absolutely.
But I don't think he'll be back next year. At some point, the owners they can't bring him back.
That all depends on how the rest of the season goes and if there is any sort of adaptation again for this team. Because I mean, in terms of like the play calling and the scheme, like that's all within his control. Like one thing that really frustrated me, and I wasn't able to watch the game because I was traveling on Sunday, but the last play of the first half was just a handoff run to David Montgomery from they were like somewhere in the 20s. Like there was practically no chance for that play to work. As far as actually putting points on the board, there was 10 seconds left. You either
And they were
take a knee,
trailing.
or you either take a knee and just go into the half, or you try some sort of hook and ladder play where you hope that there's a missed tackle or some mistake on the defense.
He wanted to get the yards up because the stats were so bad.
Not the yards. He wanted the rushing attempts up because the biggest question he always gets asked is, why don't you run the football more? You have this really good running back in David Montgomery. So I think this is the cynical part of me. The cynical part of me is saying he decided to make that play call at that point in time because he ran the football because the play wasn't going to matter anyway. But that's the sort of malpractice where it's just like, well, you're exposing so many different players to an injury just because you want to be able to point to, hey, no, we ran the ball a little bit more. So I'm pretty well fed up with the Bears between a couple different obligations. I haven't been able to watch them a whole lot the past couple of weeks, and I haven't really missed it, which is the thing that Bears ownership should be worried about the most. It's not are fans angry or if they're calling into sports talk radio. It's if they're caring. Because once they stop caring, it's a lot more difficult to get them back.
Sure. Real quick question before we get off the air here. Do the Bears beat the Lions this week? Yes or no? 3.5-point favorites. I think it's in Chicago.
If it's in Chicago, I see 3.5-point favorite. It's a toss-up game to me because the Lions have actually played some teams pretty decently. They fell behind a lot to 49ers, but came back, played Baltimore pretty tight.
Lions are
played Green
team.
Bay. Played Green Bay, pretty well for a half.
Until the fourth quarter. They played Baltimore. They didn't play great the first quarter. They played great the second half against the Niners and Ravens, and then the first half against the Packers. Haven't put together 4 quarters. But then again, have the Bears done it?
It's all going to come down to what kind of game plan we see out of Chicago. If they start Justin Fields and they actually have, moving pockets, rollouts, cutting the field in half, giving them some simpler read options, then absolutely I think the Bears can win because then Justin Fields is just playing. He's reacting instead of thinking. If we see the same game plan, then I think Lions. So I know it's a bit of a cop-out, but it depends entirely. Sure. The Bears are a better team. Let's see if they're better coached. That's where that's going to come in big.
I'll take the Bears, but I do think you bring up a great point. He was not great against the Bengals, but he was solid, significantly better against the Bengals than he was against the Browns. And that he went in, the game plan wasn't for him to start the game. That shows you that Fields, when he has to react, can make some plays. So I like the Bears because it's in Chicago just for that reason only. I think they'll lose the next game to the Lions. They'll probably split.
Sure.
But that'll do it. We'll talk plenty more football and baseball in the weeks to come. Tom, as always, a pleasure. And we'll see you next week. Have a good one, everyone.